Have you ever wondered, how do languages evolve over time to become new ones, and how do researchers know which ones are related? It all starts with a tree. Well, this kind of tree, but you're probably less familiar with this one. Maybe you'll recognize this picture more, but all are depicting the same thing, the process of evolution over time. As you can see, this representation of evolution starts with a monkey, which eventually turns into a human. In reality, evolution is not so straightforward. That's where the tree model comes in. This was the original evolutionary tree model drawn by Darwin. He proposed the idea that the diversity in life on Earth began with a few common ancestors, whose descendants changed in different ways and then broke off to become new species, which then broke off to become even more new species. Think about how you would represent a family tree, such as this one of the Royal House of Stuart, or this one of the Black family from Harry Potter. But trees representing evolution are not as simple as depicting the relationship from ancestor to descendant. They more so show the history of groups of families over time, such as this tree showing the history of the small cat family. Now let's look at something a bit more complex. Here is a tree of the Indo-European languages. Kind of overwhelming, right? Let's look a little bit closer to try and understand. You may have heard of the Romance languages before. As you can see, these languages descended from Vulgar Latin, which is extinct now, but they now include Spanish, Portuguese, French, Italian, among many others. On the other hand, English is a Germanic language, which, as you can see, is a later branch than the Romance languages. This might look like a lot, but in reality, this is not even all of the Indo-European languages, and some language families are even bigger. Plus, within these languages, there are many different varieties. Let's look at English, for example. Within such a widely spoken language, there are many dialects. Think about how someone from Alabama might talk compared to someone from New York. These differences are distinct, but English speakers can still understand different dialects. Over a very long time, if these dialects evolved independently, they could branch off to become their own distinct languages. If we look back at our language tree, we can see places where that has happened. For example, English and Scots were both separate dialects of Old English. Here's a speaker of Scots from northeastern Scotland.
So they went out on the fishing, and as they get out, it was an awful like storm come up, and this storm got worse and worse and worse.
As you can probably tell, many of these words sound very similar to words we hear in English. Some words sound familiar, but not quite intelligible to English speakers. Now that we have a better understanding of how dialects can branch off to become their own distinct languages, we can learn how experts determine branches and assume a common ancestor by comparing traits and sound correspondences of modern languages. Here's an example comparing initial consonant correspondences in English versus French, which, as we know now, are both Indo-European languages. When comparing 100 common words from both language inventories, there are 4 different instances of an F and P initial consonant correspondence. Therefore, researchers can assume that this is more than just a coincidence, and they may have some kind of common ancestry. However, this type of research and tree models in general focus a lot on common ancestry, but do not consider other social factors, which are necessary context for understanding language transmission. When looking at the tree model alone, one might assume that English would be most related to other Germanic languages, and languages like English and French would have very little similarities because their branches are so far from each other. When you look at this graph showing where the words in English actually originated from, you can see that this is not the truth. Only an estimated 26% derive from Germanic languages, which English actually evolved from according to the tree model. Yet there is more influence from French and Latin. The Norman conquest of England in 1066 made French the official language in England until the late 13th century. This had major impacts on the English language when it finally made a comeback after nearly 2 centuries, including an introduction of approximately 10,000 new words and new sounds in written letters, such as V. Now, this is not to say that tree models are inaccurate, just that they are telling only one side of the story. When looking at a language tree alone, you might end up drawing incorrect conclusions. Thinking about why English is spoken so widely around the world, as well as the effects this process might have on the language inventory, is like a puzzle piece that is missing from the language tree. It is cool to learn about how languages are related to each other, but it is important to remember when looking at a family tree that languages can be related in more ways than just ancestry.